FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 7/11/17. Well, it's interesting when people are accustomed to one type of writing, nonfiction books, and then something possesses you. You got to write the great American novel, or maybe not the great American novel, just a great novel. I mean, that's what it's really about. And Dr. Michael Guillen is with us now. His latest book is The Null Prophecy. And Dr. Guillen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kerry. It's good to talk with you.
Hey, so you're a scientist and you're basically a physicist, and now you're a novelist. How does that happen?
Well, I've had a pretty interesting career. As you say, I trained myself at Cornell University. I got a PhD in math, physics, and astronomy. Went on to teach physics at Harvard for about 8 or 9 years. But then a funny thing happened to me on the way to Cambridge, you might say, and I was drawn into television news, where I was a science editor at ABC News for about 14 years. So I did Good Morning America, Nightline, and 2020 and all that. I went on then after that, about 14 years, produced a movie, written some books along the way. And then, I'm a restless sort of guy, and I like challenging myself. And I thought to myself, well, there are things I'd like to say as a writer, as a scientist, that I haven't been able to do in these other formats. Television, time is at a premium, and you have to usually talk in sound bites. Nonfiction books, not everybody reads nonfiction. So I thought, this is time for me to train myself to be a novelist. And I did. I worked with some terrific editors at UCLA and at Simon & Schuster, and I had a great idea for a book, and The Null Prophecy is the result. So the book came out this week. I'm very excited. The buzz that I'm receiving from people is very, very encouraging. But it's yes, you're right, Gary. It's a very, very much a fish of it's a horse of a different color. So it's an interesting experience.
So the premise of the book, why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. It's a fact-based thriller in the sense that it's not, one of these pie-in-the-sky books. It's based on current events. It's based on really solid science. But it's a thriller. It's an entertaining thriller that brings together 2 very different people, 2 very different protagonists. One is Allie Armendariz. She's a Harvard physicist-turned-TV correspondent. And she is a baby Christian who is struggling with not only her faith, but with her family and with her personal life. And she's harboring a secret that centers on something that really terrible happened to her in the recent past. And then the other protagonist is a Calder Sinclair. He's a reclusive inventor. He's created a vehicle that promises to change forever the way we travel over long distances. He's very excited about that. But he's a hardcore secularist, and he's kind of angry at God, and for many good reasons. He's had a hard childhood, and his wife died in a freak accident. Now his one and only kid has gone off to Australia to intern at Darwin University. And so he's kind of left behind, and he has his hopes pinned on this invention of his. He's hoping that that'll turn his life around. So what happens is that circumstances bring these 2 very different people together, and they react to the dangers that I pose in the novel in a very different way, to the point where there's a budding romance, but they can't decide whether, they really like each other or whether their differences are just too great. And so that's a dimension of the thriller. But the danger that I introduce here starts with scientists in Northeast Canada discovering a small hole in the Earth's magnetic field. That's a big deal because the magnetic field shields us from space weather. And so the danger snowballs from there. It's compounded by the fact that there's a G20 summit convening in San Diego in a week, and there's rumors about a secret provocateur, a very mysterious guy who's kind of plotting behind the scenes to organize major rioting, which is ironic coming off of Hamburg. But right. I hadn't counted on that. I wrote this book, 2 years ago. But so all of that all that peril escalates, and Calder and Allie are drawn into that. And the question is, can they get their act together to help save the day or not? And it kind of all ends in a spectacular final scene. My hope is that it'll be successful enough. I've set it up for a sequel. These could be very recurring characters. I love them dearly. Very interesting, very contemporary characters. But there you have it. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a great summer read. It could scare the dickens out of you, but I think you'll learn a lot along the way. Yeah. As well as be entertained.
Yeah. So what was it like going from nonfiction to fiction? How different is that?
It is quite different in some ways, Carrie. I mean, it's the same as writing nonfiction in the sense you need to be disciplined. You know, I get up typically around 4 a.m. I write for, about 4 hours and then take a break and then edit what I wrote the day before. In the next 4 hours, and then pretty much call it a day. So that discipline of just sitting down and writing is the same. What's different is that I'm free to create characters, situations, locations, because I do care about keeping it kind of honest and realistic. I'm not a big fan of science fiction or books that kind of spin out of control. Nevertheless, I have a great deal of freedom to create things. It's a lot of work, and I love that. I love creating the characters, writing, getting to know them. These characters have become very real to me, even though they are fictional. The things that they go through affect me emotionally. I can find myself sometimes writing about them, and I'll either be laughing or I'll be crying. Seriously, and because you just get so invested emotionally, and you're hoping that the reader will as well. So I think that's the biggest difference. It's the freedom, Carrie.
Yeah. And do you feel like one of these characters is somewhat autobiographical?
Yeah. Well, you're taught to write what you know, and what I know is science. I know the television news business. And so I decided, well, you know what? I've had a pretty interesting life. I was born in East LA, and it's been quite a ride, even to this day. Life has taken me to places and to situations I would have never imagined as a kid in East LA. Never, not in a million years. I would never imagine I'd be talking to you right now about a novel I wrote. That's just ridiculous. And, so I thought, why not start there? But I didn't want to make it into a male character. And so I made the decision of making it a female character. And I'm glad I did. She's very interesting, and she's inspired by my own kind of life. It is somewhat autobiographical, but at the same time, because she is a female, she's going through things that I haven't had to go through, and that kind of makes it interesting. Calder's character is based on so many scientists I've interviewed over the years who have discovered something and who have high hopes for them, and sometimes it pans out and sometimes it doesn't. So again, even Calder's character is based on just a kind of a montage of scientists I've interviewed from all over the world over the years. So I like Calder. He's a very vulnerable character. He's got some really serious issues, but he's a good guy at heart. He's been dealt a bad hand in life, and he's just trying to dig himself out of that hole. And so, yeah, it's somewhat autobiographical. I give the reader a behind-the-scenes look at television news, which is, given the state of things today with the media, I think readers will find it very interesting to see how stories are developed and shot and then aired, and all the kinds of things that go on between reporters and sources. And so there's and it's all, again, very realistic about what goes on. I've been in the television news business for so many years now. It's like second nature to me. So I think people will find that interesting. And then I think, apart from it being and I mean it sincerely, I get bored. I don't know about you, Carrie, but I get bored easily.
Oh, yes.
My wife, God bless her, she can read these thick books, and I'm like, how does she do that? I go to bed at the end of a long day, and I sit up in bed hoping I can read one chapter before nodding off, and sometimes I make it, sometimes I don't. So I was determined with the Null Prophecy. I just decided, this is going to be a page turner. And so literally from the first page, you're in the action, and it doesn't really let you go. A lot of twists and turns, a lot of subordinate characters, a lot of subplots. Action takes place all over the world, right to the end. It keeps you guessing what's going to happen. In that respect, I'm happy I did it. I've kind of been bitten by the bug now, so I think I'm supposed to be writing another nonfiction book, but I almost just want to put that aside and work on the sequel for this one. But
go for it. I mean, it really sounds good. I'm just gotten the book off of Amazon, and I look forward to reading it. And so everything you write about, though, whether it's fiction or not, has a scientific basis, correct?
Absolutely, Kerry. I mean, I'm through and through a scientist. You scratch me and I'll bleed science. I mean, that's who I am. Science has been the love of my life since I was in second grade. I was kind of a really odd bird in my family. They didn't quite understand where I came from. I just loved science, and all through UCLA, Cornell, and then through Harvard. And I did, and to this day I love it. So yes, science permeates everything that I do.
Yeah, and your background, obviously, you've dedicated your life to it. So climate change, you've got some strong opinions on it, don't you?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, so I've been watching this kind of unfolding drama. But I know a lot of my colleagues who are climate scientists. These are my people, and I understand the scientific method, and so I have a perspective perhaps that is different than the average person's. Here's kind of my take on things. The first thing that people need to understand is that the climate is a very complex system with a lot of moving parts. It has positive feedback cycles, negative feedback cycles, and the challenge for a climate scientist is to try to take all of these cycles into account, play them off of each other, and see what the net result is. And so the advantage we have today is that there are supercomputers, and so the supercomputers can juggle a lot of these complications, but even supercomputers cannot really handle climate in its entirety. It's just way complex. So let me give you a simple example of what I'm talking about. You throw some carbon dioxide into the air. It's a greenhouse gas, so it's going to warm the temperatures, right? We know that. We've done experiments that's easily verified. But that's not all there is to it. If it were, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. What happens is and I did stories about this when I was much younger. I remember when I was interning at Science News magazine. When you put carbon dioxide into the environment, into the air, the vegetation love it. Because through photosynthesis, vegetation feed off of carbon dioxide. They ingest it, and then they exhale, they expire oxygen. That's what makes vegetation so wonderful. We give them carbon dioxide, they give us oxygen. So this wonderful kind of symbiotic relationship we have with vegetation. So what happens is that when you put so think about it. Think about what's going on here. You put carbon dioxide, heat things up, but in heating, it doesn't just heat up the air, it causes the vegetation to grow faster, which absorbs carbon dioxide. Right. So you have a mechanism that warms and a mechanism that cools. So the question is, which one wins out? And so these supercomputers kind of chug along, trying to figure it out. But it's Terry, that is one simple example of what I'm talking about. The yin and the yang. There are millions cycles like that play off of each other. And so that's number one. That's the first thing that your listeners should take into consideration. It's really complicated. Number two, we don't know everything. So even if we were somehow to master the complication, you have to look out for the unexpected. So let me give you an example. I was on Fox Business the other day talking about this. Some scientists went to the Arctic Ocean because there are areas in the shallow waters of the Arctic where methane is seeping up through the water.
Right.
Right? And
of course.
Methane is even worse than CO2 as a greenhouse. So these scientists are very interested in, taking an inventory, and they had the mindset that, here is a source of global warming, and we want to understand it better. Well, lo and behold, yes, there is methane coming through, but what they found, to their utter surprise, was these very same areas were sucking in carbon dioxide like there was no tomorrow. And so much so that there is a net cooling effect going on at these seepage sites, not a net warming effect. So it completely upset the apple cart. So you go, whoops, go back to the supercomputers and say, I got to turn the positive into a negative.
Yeah.
So So you have to deal not only with the inherent complexity of the climate system, but also the unexpected. So there's that, and then you throw politics into the mix, and then now you throw in funding sources and how that prejudices the kind of research that gets done. I'm not saying scientists are dishonest. They're an honest lot. My people are an honest lot. But let's face it, I mean, they have to make a living. And there's no money in being a skunk at the picnic. And so all the money is going into scientists and research that kind of corroborates the current consensus. The consensus should be taken seriously, by all means, that we are contributing a good deal to the climate warming, but a consensus is not infallible. So,
and that isn't science.
That's basically my take.
Right? And science is not based on consensus, right? I mean, science is about the scientific method, and you test a hypothesis, and if you get enough proof, your hypothesis becomes a theory. And if you don't, it's just idle speculation. Has climate change, man-made, man-affected climate change evolved from a hypothesis to a theory yet?
Well, that's the question. That's a $64,000 question. But you said that the consensus is yes, right? I mean, right now there is a very well-publicized, strongly stated scientific consensus that yes, man is mostly responsible for the kind of warming we're seeing. Now, we've seen about a 1.4 degree Fahrenheit increase since 1880, but some of that was not our responsibility. But the scientific consensus is right now about since 1948, 49, 50 onward, we have been mostly responsible. That's the scientific consensus, right? But as you said a moment ago, science is not like a presidential election. The majority, whether it's an electoral majority, in the case of a presidential, the electoral majority does not determine the outcome. So even though 95% of the scientists, let's say, buy into the current consensus that man is mostly responsible for the current warming that we're witnessing, well, that may or may not end up being true. There are plenty of times in history when the scientific consensus was absolutely dead wrong. I mean, you only have to go back to the 16th century for a glaring example of that, right? I mean, in the 16th century, the scientific consensus, very strongly stated, was that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that the sun revolved around the Earth. It gave rise to the Ptolemaic theory of the solar system. That was the scientific consensus of the day. People don't realize that, right?
Sure, of course.
And that had been going on for 1,800 years since Aristotle, and all the facts seem to support it. I mean, scientists would say, like they do today, but look at the facts. Prove that the sun moves around the Earth, right? The sun rises, the sun sets, and so people, even the church bought into it. For goodness' sake, they made the mistake, and this we should learn from the church's mistake, right? The Catholic Church bought into the scientific consensus and led it to persecute Galileo, but it wasn't the church; it was the scientific consensus that was at the root of the problem. And it wasn't until much later that we discovered, there was evidence, Foucault's pendulum and the phases of the Venus that Galileo saw through a telescope. We were wrong. The scientific consensus was wrong. So here we are today in a similar situation where we're faced with a very strident scientific consensus, which may or may not be true, but you cannot just mindlessly buy into it because science is not infallible. Scientists are not infallible. A scientific consensus is not infallible. So any government or any company or any individual needs to approach any scientific consensus, not just this one, with wariness. You have to be wary about it.
Skepticism,
inform yourself, right?
Isn't skepticism a major part of being a scientist?
It is everything.
Right.
It's everything, Carrie. It's everything. And by the way, in case people are wondering, science can never, and please listen to me, science can never prove anything ever. Okay? Right. I'm going to say that again. Science can never prove anything ever. And I love the way Einstein explained why that's true. He said, no amount of experimentation can ever prove me right. One experiment can prove me wrong. Okay? Yeah. So, and this is what happened. I mean, he knew it. He found himself at the head of a revolution because we believed certain things about how the universe works, and then that was a scientific consensus, the Newtonian consensus. Again, we had a powerful scientific consensus, and it proved to be wrong. So, yeah, it's all about remaining skeptical There's no such thing as settled science. That is preposterous. Anybody who says that is totally scientifically illiterate. Science is constantly in a state of being unsettled because we're always one discovery away, one experiment away from finding that we're wrong. And that's the beauty of science, because it's constantly correcting itself, but that's also its Achilles heel.
Right.
So,
yeah, I totally agree. Hey, I don't know if you remember, it goes back a long time. There was a comedy group called Firesign Theater. And
I remember them.
And they put out an album, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And I go back to the greatest thinkers of all time. Socrates, what did he say? He said, I am the wisest man in Athens because I know I don't know. And, Doctor, every time I think I really know something and I'm absolutely positive about it, you know what happens? I find out, you know what? I don't think I'm right here. I think I made a mistake. Oops. And, this is a real problem. And, what do you do here? I mean, you have to be skeptical, right? And it's so important to be a skeptic and to know that you don't know everything. And the possibility that you are wrong is a very, very real possibility here, right?
Well, it is. Absolutely. Everything you just said is absolutely true. And one of the major discoveries was like in the 70s. I remember covering it. Or not in the 70s. I would have been at ABC. I was there at 85. So it was like in the 80s. There was a major discovery made that led to this revelation, Carrie. Now listen to this. We now know, based on research we've done over the last couple of decades, that the universe we see and study, the universe that is the basis of our entire discipline of astronomy, right? Everything that astronomy consists of is based on our observations of the visible universe. And what we've discovered is that only 5% of the universe is visible. 95% of the universe is invisible to us in the form of dark energy and dark matter. So if that doesn't cause you to be skeptical, to be wary, to be humble about making pronouncements, I don't know what will. When I was a grad student at Cornell, Carl Sagan was getting to be popular. And Carl would say it very eloquently. He said, science is a mindset that allows you to live with uncertainty, because a good scientist is a person who understands that science is not in the business of proving anything. It's in the business of probing, constantly probing, never quite understanding fully, never being able to prove anything, always in this kind of constant state of uncertainty. And he said, and he took that as a badge of honor, that as a scientist, that's where you should live. You should live in that uncertain space. So when I hear scientists who have become so politicized and they make these kind of bald-faced statements like they're the Pope, uttering some infallible papal bull, I say to myself, this is just dishonest. This is not science. These people are not representing science well. I love science. It's a brilliant technique when used properly, but it can do certain things and it cannot do other things. And we need to keep that in perspective, whether we're talking about climate change or genetically modified foods or the use of pesticides or vaccines. I don't care what you're talking about. But whenever anybody rears up and somehow wants to bludgeon you over the head because there is a quote-unquote scientific consensus, be very wary, be very skeptical of that.
Yeah, for good reason, for very good reason.
Sir.
And
yes.
So, Doctor, we kind of have to wrap up. Just tell us again the Null Prophecy. Obviously we're going to get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever fine books used to be sold, and before the internet. Yeah. Another thing, if you asked scientists 100 years ago, do you think that people will stop buying physical books and they'll be able to get them in this little device and they'll be able to read them wherever they go and, download them from the ether? These people would have had you committed. Let's face it. We know this.
Absolutely. That's the great uncertainty of science, both for good and for bed. But thank you, Carrie. I really am excited about my book, and I hope people do go out. And I think it'll be a great summer read, and for sure it'll entertain you. The Null Prophecy. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. And by the way, if you got a question for Dr. Guillen or myself, email me, kl@kerrylutz.com. You can tweet at Kerry Lutz and Facebook page Financial Survival Network. Doctor, we wish you the best of luck on your book, and we'll look forward to the sequel. Take care.
You bet. Happy summer. Thanks, Carrie.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.